Hello there, everybody. WhatCulture Wrestling's Adam Cleary here, and before we get started, I'm just gonna give you a fact, and I want to let you process it for a second, okay? On Monday night, WWE called up 4 of the best professional wrestlers on the entire planet, and it somehow wasn't a good thing. Like, everybody in the crowd was just disinterested, and everybody at home was just confused. I just want you to process that for a second. Can you feel it? Said Triple H. Can you feel it in the air? We're on the road to WrestleMania, which, although true, was a very odd thing for him to say because he was about to do something normally reserved for the Raw after WrestleMania. That's when you call up your big stars, isn't it? That's when you have that kind of moment, not some random night in February. But the problem WWE have at the moment is with WrestleMania, specifically the state of its upper mid-card. Your Jinder Mahals, your Eliases, your Baron Corbins, your Bobby Lashleys, none of these men are considered in the eyes of management to be worthy of a singles match on their biggest show. They are not, in Vince McMahon's own words, stars. Thus, this past week, Vince McMahon turned to Triple H and asked him for his stars, specifically Ricochet, Aleister Black, Tommaso Ciampa, and Johnny Gargano. In Vince's mind, the reason the ratings are down is because there aren't enough stars on the show, so he just pulled them from NXT, and he thinks that's going to solve the problem. But stars is such a subjective thing. Those 4 guys are stars in NXT because they're booked as stars in NXT. The reason there's no stars on the main roster is because they don't book stars on the main roster. So how long before those 4 guys from being on the main roster are no longer stars? Well, we can measure it. Yeah, we can actually work that out. We've been back through years and years and years of NXT call-up data, and there is a scientific formula for how long they all last on the main roster. A working scientific formula, I'm not making this up, for NXT call-ups. So let's have a look at that, shall we? And we shall start with the initial data of the 4 call-ups. So Ricochet, in a vacuum, made a very good impression because obviously he's a tremendous worker, and when you watch a Ricochet match, you are just impressed. But the problem he's going to have is that Raw, specifically, already has a high-flying, incredibly hard-working perma-face on its roster in the shape of Finn Balor, so something will have to give somewhere. Is actually quite tricky, this one, because Finn Balor's thing is he is the extraordinary man who does extraordinary things, and he's just been joined on the roster by an even more extraordinary man who does even more extraordinary things. So somewhere that ain't gonna work. Aleister Black didn't fare quite as well as Ricochet, though. Like, on the face of it, it was a squash against Elias where he got to do all of his cool moves, but when you watched it, it wasn't really, was it? It was an 8-minute long Raw filler spot. Like, if you only know Aleister Black from takeover matches, like most of the audience will do, the last 3 times you've seen him, you've had 4-star match, 4 3/4 star match, 8-minute chinlock special. Mercifully, though, Ciampa and Gargano were at least booked and scripted with a degree of nuance. Their backstage bits were good, their matches were good, and it all just about sort of fit with their characters and their stories in NXT. So between the 4 of them, you've got 1 hit, 1 miss, and 1 maybe. Okay, so that's them in the present, but WWE have a meticulous methodology that they always tend to stick to, so let's look at 4 recent historical examples that can draw us some parallels. The easiest comparison to make with Ricochet is his old Dragon Gate buddy, Neville. Now, if you remember when he arrived on the main roster, he was spectacular to watch, but he just hadn't got the promo side of it down enough for the main roster. And likewise, Ricochet is very good in the ring, amazing to watch, but can't quite work as well on the mic as you'd want him to. Like, he's not awful, don't get me wrong, he can cut a promo, but he's not quite good enough yet to open an episode of WWE television. And on WWE television, if you don't lead, you follow. Sometimes the buzzards. Aleister Black is a tricky one because obviously, like, gothic is his whole aesthetic, and that is something that Vince McMahon historically absolutely hates. He couldn't stand the way Gangrel looked, and he took some serious convincing to even buy in to The Undertaker. Now, Black is a fantastic worker, but again, Vince McMahon doesn't like strikers. Funny story here. Remember Tajiri? Yeah, it was all kicks and power and whatever. Vince McMahon hated his in-ring style so much that he once called off a match in 2004 while he was actually in the ring having it. That happened. That's how much he hates strikers. So, good luck there, Ali. Ciampa and Gargano are easy to compare, though. They are basically the new Owens and Zayn. They took the long way around to WWE, enjoyed title reigns while in NXT, were presented as best friends, but then did the horrible, horrible betrayal angle. Now they are linked together forever. Sometimes they're friends, sometimes they're enemies, sometimes they're bromance, whatever they want to do. Owens and Zayn have basically become Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, and Vince will absolutely see Gargano and Ciampa as the same thing. But I did promise you some actual science here. So this is the data that we have carefully examined for every single NXT call-up over the last 20 years and what it tells us about these four. So Phil, a graph, please. Now for this, we have examined the last 20 call-ups, taking us all the way back to Finn Balor in 2016, how long they spent in NXT, how successful they were there, how many weeks they've been on the main roster, and how many weeks it took WWE to somehow kill their push. You will be startled. Okay, so first up is Finn Balor, whose introduction was spectacular, yes, but 73 weeks into his main roster career was going 50-50 with Kane on Raw. This is his burial point. Next up was Bayley, who did go into her first WrestleMania as Women's Champion. Yes, very impressive, but not long after was doing that kendo stick on a pole, This Is Your Life segment with Alexa Bliss. She managed 32 weeks. Samoa Joe was booked very strong for quite a long time, but by the time he got to that main event with Reigns, where they were just having him be the most boring man in the world, and the off chance he got Reigns cheered for doing anything exciting, they'd clearly given up on him. That was 64 weeks in. Hard to argue that they've buried Elias, so we'll just kind of leave a little gap for him for now. Now, I'm sure if you asked the Revival, they would say it happened almost straight away, but through a combination of injury and everything else, they didn't really get a proper run on the main roster until sometime into their call-up. Now, where the burial point is open to debate, but I think losing to Breezango on main event is probably it, so we'll put that at 56 weeks. Now, Ty Dillinger was, of course, very over when he came up, and they put him in a few good feuds, and he was even in the US title picture for a while, but following a loss to Baron Corbin on SmackDown, he just vanished out of nowhere for a good few months, so we're going to give that 43 weeks. Shinsuke Nakamura, they brought him up, but he was just kind of floating about the upper mid-card, keeping his powder dry for his Royal Rumble win, and then he lost to everybody's surprise at WrestleMania, but we thought that's okay, because this is all going to work if his heel turn is good, and then at the next pay-per-view, it was just low blows, wasn't it, for months. Low blow after low blow after low blow after non-finish after not winning a title. 50 weeks. Nobody was ready for Asuka. You remember all of that. And then Charlotte was, as it turned out. And then Carmella was, but Carmella's good, so you can't really class that as a burial. But working Ellsworth, that is getting buried. So 36 weeks. A lot of people will tell you that Bobby Roode was doomed the moment he was called up, but if you actually look at the matches, he was booked reasonably strongly for quite a while. That said, he lost the US title and then lost clean to Jinder immediately the night after, and he's never really recovered as a single star since, so 29 weeks. Ember Moon was on NXT being presented as Asuka's actual equal, and then not long after her call-up was trading wins on episodes of Main Event. She lasted 16 weeks. Now, the Authors of Pain is a weird one because they just called them up and then didn't really do anything with them for ages, but despite how strongly they looked in NXT, and I mean this, they went 50-50 with Breezango on Main Event. 7 weeks in. Now, No Way Jose was a bit of a comedy character, and we weren't really expecting much of him, admittedly, but he went from being a bit of fun to just a jobber in 7 weeks. Now, we've got two here, which I'm also going to leave a little gap for, because I don't personally think they've buried Drew yet. Yes, the whole three-man stable thing did kind of kill his aura, but there is still enough there for them to do something with, in my opinion. And the Iconics, because you can't really bury the Iconics because their whole shtick is sort of burying themselves. So we're going to leave a little gap for those two. Andrade Cien Almas was at one stage the last person on the main roster to have had a 5-star rated match. And then, well, what they've done with him on SmackDown is so hit and miss. He was called up, but then he wasn't, then he was, then he wasn't, and he was on TV, and he was off TV. But 13 weeks in, they started doing a intergender feud where they pushed Zelina Vega ahead of him. Now, no disrespect to Zelina Vega, but she was his manager, and she was getting a stronger push than he was. That's 13 weeks. Sanity. Well, it depends how you want to grade this, don't you? Because in my eyes, they actually buried them 4 weeks before we even saw them, because they announced their call-up. I did the pay-per-view live stream. We were dead excited. Sanity were coming. And they didn't for a month, so -4. Nikki Cross, after a long time, they finally called up Nikki Cross, even though nobody was ready for Nikki, and she lost her first match. One. She scores 1. EC3 was introduced in a series of backstage things, but then started going 50-50 on Raw inside 2 weeks of his in-ring debut. 2. Heavy Machinery were also introduced in backstage segments, and then one of them just sort of pestered and bothered Alexa Bliss. So that's 2 weeks, or you can count from when they started doing the Bushwhackers thing. That's 3. We'll say 2. Lacey Evans was earmarked as a potential WrestleMania opponent for Asuka, and then they just changed their mind, and yeah, they put her in a spot in the Rumble that she was nowhere near ready for. That wasn't her fault, but it made her look quite bad. 2 for her. Do you see this graph? Can you actually see what is going on here? Like, yes, everybody gets buried eventually. Nobody can be pushed in wrestling forever. That's just how it works. But the rate at which these call-ups is going wrong is increasing. It's getting faster. We have measured it. Even the 3 outliers on this graph, the people I've left off, come with their own caveats. Elias was, by Triple H's own words, never really meant for NXT. They just put him there to kind of tighten him up a bit. He was always going to be a main roster guy. Drew was only in the brand for 26 weeks. They wanted him up as quickly as they possibly could, and the Iconics are... well, they're just the Iconics. This should absolutely terrify anybody getting called up from NXT. Like, the average amount of time these pushes have lasted for is 20 weeks. That's less than 6 months. The average of the last 10 call-ups is just 5 weeks. 5. That's just over a month before they have no idea what to do with you. I'm not sure what the craziest thing about this is, the fact that it's so visibly accelerating, or the fact that Vince thinks there are no stars on the main roster. I mean, look at some of the names on this. Balor, Bayley, Joe, Nakamura, Rude, Moon, Albus, Christ, EC3. These could all be stars if you just booked them right. Anyway, though, thanks to all of this data, we can use it to extrapolate the futures of our 4 newest NXT call-ups. Yes, we've got a clever machine. We've poured all this data into it. We've factored in how good they were in NXT, what they're doing with them now, and we've got the futures of all 4 men. Okay, here we go. Ricochet. On the March 4th episode of Raw, the one and only, having drawn the ire of Bobby Lashley and Lio Rush, faces both men in a gauntlet match. Rush goes over when Vince confuses him for Ricochet. Ugh. Okay, right, Aleister Black. Loses to Elias in a February 25th rematch, that's not good, before which Elias plays an electric guitar on a very special heavy metal version of his segment. And then, on March the 4th Raw, Elias will attempt to cheer up the Goth with a rendition of I've Got the Joy. Ugh. All right. Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa. After 2 weeks of simmering tension, Ciampa consoles Gargano following their loss to Heath Slater and Rhino. The scene of commiseration is drawn out just long enough for Michael Cole to say, will Ciampa smash Gargano's face into the Titantron? Find out as Raw rolls on. Ugh. But hey, look, maybe we're wrong about all this. Maybe the date is slightly off. Maybe people aren't getting buried in some capacity a mere week after they get called up to the main roster. I mean, it's not like Johnny Gargano's just lost his North American title on the first episode of... Oh. So yes, there you have it. Data, actual scientific data, formulae, and methods that prove that WWE are not doing very well with the call-ups at the minute. I mean, I don't know what to say. I'm not even trying to be negative here. I literally looked this all up thinking it would be fine, and it wasn't. It was horrifying. But let us know what you made of it all in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the meantime, though, thank you very much for watching. I have, of course, been Adam Cleary, and that wasn't even a theory, was it? Proved it. Bye.